Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this video is an update of a video that I have previously filmed, which was a comparison between the Canon 1DX Mark II and the Panasonic GH5S. Right off the bat, I just want to say are both phenomenal cameras. So whatever side of the fence you're on, I think both cameras are extremely capable in whatever type of videography that you do. Whether it's wedding videos, real estate, and commercials, I think both are phenomenal cameras. And I just want to say, whatever camera you choose to go with, you're not losing or missing out on much. Now, there are a few things that I want to talk about. This video is not going to be very technical. I already made a video on that, so if you haven't seen it, go watch that and then come back and watch this one. This is more of a real world experience video. Now that I've had both cameras for a very long time, and I have used both to shoot various video jobs like weddings, real estate, and stuff like that. So just some context, the GH5, which is what I'm shooting on right now, was the first camera that I purchased when I decided to start a videography business. And to have access to a camera that does 4K at 60 frames per second and really good slow motion at a very, very affordable price was a game changer for my business, and it really helped accelerate my business on a very fast level. So I would say I am kind of biased towards Panasonic. The first thing I want to touch on is the autofocus. Now, I was really kind of surprised when I came out with my original video of this. I had a lot of Panasonic enthusiasts that were hating on me because I simply said that the Canon 1DX Mark II's autofocus was better and that I didn't like the Panasonic autofocus on the GH5S. And I'm just gonna be completely straight and honest, and I'm sorry if I offend people, but yes, the Panasonic cameras have come out with firmware updates that have improved the autofocus, and I'm sorry for saying this, but compared to the Canon 1DX Mark II, the GH5's autofocus is just not there. And the great thing about the autofocus on the Canon cameras is it is so clean that it's almost as if someone is professionally racking focus, and I'll throw up some footage to show what I mean. Whereas the GH5 cameras, there is a little bit of hunting even in the most recent firmware updates. And I've watched a lot. In fact, when I initially posted my first video on this, I had people sending me links. And don't get me wrong, it was getting good, but compared to the Canon dual pixel autofocus system, it's just not quite there. So I'm sorry if you're a Panasonic enthusiast. And I even asked some of these people that were getting mad at me for saying the Canon's autofocus was better. I was like, do you own a Canon camera? And they're like, no. And so I feel like I have a pretty credible opinion at this point after using both these cameras and having a GH5S that has the most recent firmware update, that when it comes to autofocus, I'm sorry Panasonic, but the winner is the 1DX Mark II. Now in my technical review, I did touch on Lowlight, and for all you Panasonic enthusiasts out there, you'll be happy to know that the GH5S is better in low light. So in this low light test, I was pushing the ISOs on both of these cameras, and both were exceptionally clean up until about 6400. And then when you went beyond that, the GH5S really started to shine and there was a lot less noise than the 1DX Mark II. Now that being said, both are really capable in low light. And as I mentioned in my last video of these two cameras, I wouldn't necessarily let low light performance be the determining factor which one of these cameras you get, because both are exceptional in low light. But if low light is the most important thing to you, then 100% I would say go with the GH5S because you will get a cleaner image. Now, speaking of image sharpness, now I want to be careful what I say because it seems like no matter what opinion I give, whether you're a 1DX fan or a GH5S fan, whatever I say, if I say a con towards any of these, I'm going to get haters getting mad at me for it. But when it comes to image, I would say when the GH5S is completely in focus, the image is so tack sharp and is so good looking. Now the 1DX Mark II 100% is also extremely sharp. I would say just shooting with both of these cameras, I would say that the GH5S is just a little bit sharper, and that's something that Panasonic has been known with their cameras, is their images are just really sharp. Now that being said, you have to make sure that when you're manually focusing, that you are in focus. Now, the good thing about the GH5S camera is it does have those like dancing ants, or, you know, it highlights and shows you what's in focus. So that's usually not an issue. Whereas the 1DX Mark II, it doesn't have that. So you kind of have to just spot check it. Now, with that being said, going back to the autofocus, it is so good that I've never had an issue. In all the wedding videos I've filmed, I've never had a problem with the image not being in focus. And in fact, I trust it so much, and that might not be a good thing, but I trust the autofocus so much with my experience with it that I don't worry about if my image is in focus. Most of the time, I just use the flexi zone setting in the autofocus, and whatever's in that box is pretty tack sharp, so it's not a worry. Now, when it comes to battery life, both are really good in battery life. Now, as you can see, I have the battery grip on the GH5S that extends the battery life even more so. If you don't even have the battery grip, the battery life is still very, very good. Now, I know a lot of people complain about Sony cameras that the battery life isn't very good, but on both of these cameras, it's really, really great. Now, when you talk about price, yes, the 1DX Mark II is significantly more expensive. It is significantly more expensive. It retails at B&H for like $5,500, whereas the GH5S is, I think at this point, it's quite a bit lower than $2,500, so it's less than half the price. And for the specs that you're getting out of the GH5S, you're getting an incredible deal. An edge that the GH5S does have over the Canon 1DX Mark II is it does have the ability to shoot internally at 10-bit. Now, I primarily don't use that function very much. However, if you're somebody who is shooting with green screens and you're having to do a lot of chroma or color keying, I think the GH5S is definitely the camera for you because you'll get a lot cleaner image. And with experience of working with green screen before, if you're shooting in a lower bit rate, you kind of get these weird artifacts on the edges of your subject when using a green screen. But if you're shooting in 10-bit, there's a lot more data there, and it's easier for your editing software to recognize what is to be keyed out and what is not to be. So if I didn't own any of these cameras and I was in the market to buy one, which camera would I buy? In other words, what do I think is the better camera overall? I would say that the GH5S has to win. Now, that could be due to biasness, but after using both of these cameras, I found that I use the GH5S a little bit more. Not by much, but I do use it a little bit more. And why do I say that? The Panasonic GH5S, it was built to be a filmmaker's camera. The 1DX Mark II does an exceptional job at that as well, but just the menu settings and the system and the bit rates and the frame rates, I think the GH5S is the better camera, only when you take into consideration the price, with the GH5S being less than half the money of the 1DX Mark II, and for the specs you get out of the Panasonic, I think it is the more worthwhile buy. Now, that being said, if you're someone who is going to be vlogging a lot or recording yourself or doing interviews or is relying on autofocus, 100% the 1DX Mark II is going to be the better buy. Now, I personally think if you were to put the autofocus from the 1DX Mark II and put it into the GH5S, I think that would be the best camera on the market. Sony, not a fan. Now, I had a couple comments on a last video I did comparing these two cameras, and someone was like, well,
why don't you ever use Sony?
And personally, I'm not a fan of Sony. I think, yes, they're good in low light, but aside from that, I feel like with Sony, you're kind of missing the mark on all of the filmmaking features that videographers are wanting. I mean, I don't get it. Fuji, Blackmagic, and some other brands have cameras that shoot 4K at 60 frames per second. Why doesn't Sony? So overall, depending on the situation, will determine which camera I'm using. When I am bringing a second shooter along who doesn't have, you know, a ton of experience or as much as I have, I will put them on the 1DX Mark II because all I have to tell them is, look, point and shoot, and whatever you're pointing at, it's going to be in focus, so it's really easy. Whereas I primarily will be gunning with the GH5S camera. Of course, you know, there's no way around it. I know I'm going to get haters for saying that I personally would use the GH5S. Now, the GH5S does have a micro four thirds sensor, and I better include this or else I'm going to get somebody mad. Yes, you can use adapters on the GH5S camera to use any Canon lenses, Nikon, Sony glass. So I would say there's a lot more flexibility in your lens selection than the 1DX Mark II. But some people just prefer a full frame camera. And there is a specific look you get with full frame. You will get more bokeh out of a full frame camera. I think the equivalent is a micro four thirds lens, let's say that's 2.8, which is what I'm shooting on right now, is the equivalent of a f4 lens on full frame. So you kind of just have to weigh, you know, the lenses that you want to use versus the camera body you want to use. But that's pretty much my update comparison. If you're looking for more of a technical review, make sure you watch my last video on the subject. I go a lot more into depth. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, just leave them down in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. And let me know what you guys think. Which out of these two cameras are you going to be buying, or are you currently using, and why? So thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know you're here, and we'll catch you guys next time.